This is second part of error handling in the DataPower. In the first part, we discussed the mechanics related to request rule, response rule, the way errors are raised, and how typically the errors land into an error rule. I discussed in brief about the on-error action there as well, but on-error action is a very useful way in which errors are handled in DataPower, so they warrant more elaboration. In this video, I'm going to talk about the on-error action in more detail. At the end of the video, I'm also going to talk about the XSLT that does the error handling, and I will try to answer questions. For example, how to capture errors if at all they happen in the main program or the main rule like request rule or response rule. So without further delay, let's get started. I'm building upon what I described in part 1 of the error handling, and hence I have a multi-protocol gateway at my disposal. In part 1, so let me open the probe, let me flush it for a moment. Now this is a clean probe, and I'm going to use probe to elaborate and discuss more details around on-error action. This is the processing policy. You can match its name, error handling demo multi-protocol gateway policy. It's open in a new window. And in my previous video, I told you that this is the fault injector, which I'm deliberately injecting it here to ensure that these two processing actions happen successfully. But here, I'm throwing an error, and I showed you that future processing actions are skipped. Okay. Now, here are some scenarios where you might want to use the on-error action. The first scenario is that you have an error rule, certainly, that is a generic error rule, but you want to handle errors in some custom way. For example, you have multiple request rule and you are enhancing the definition of the policy, maybe because some enhancement came in. And as part of that, you are writing a rule here. Good. Now, in that rule, you want to do your own error handling. You don't want to rely on the error handling rule that is present there. So, on-error action will come handy. Without on-error action, if at all an error happens in your rule, the control will by default go to the error rule defined on the policy palette. In this case, MPGW policy rule 2. You may not want that. In that case, on-error rule will be useful. Second is that you might want to handle errors differently in different scenarios. For example, if error happens here, you might want to handle it in a separate error rule. And if error happens here, you might want to handle it in a separate way. If that is your scenario, then a single error rule will not work. It will be too complicated there to distinguish from where the error came in, and hence, certainly it's possible, but it would be too complicated. So to simplify this, on-error action is going to help you. So in this case, what I want is, I want to have a separate error rule, not this one, but I want to handle error in a separate error rule. And that error rule is something that I'm going to invoke from my on-error action. So without further delay, drag and drop advanced action at the beginning, and I will talk about more about why I put it at the beginning and what will happen if I put it here and so on. So let's first put it at the beginning. Double click to open it, and you have a on-error action. Let me see where it is. On-error action. Click on next. And for now, let's keep everything default. In the processing rule, I have created an on-error processing rule, an error rule separately, which I created for on-error, and I named it such that you can visually distinguish it from other error rules. So this error rule is what you see at the bottom. error handling rule 2. But this one you don't see on this palette. It is a separate error rule. Click on Done and click on Apply Policy. Now, we'll go back to the probe and we'll see, okay, we don't have a probe window open, so let's enable the probe. Open the probe window and let's hit this. So send this request. Now, you see that the request went to DataPower and you are getting a different error over here. It is characterized by this thing, CERRH, which is custom error handler. And I just ensured that I inject this string from my custom error handler, which is part of my onError action, to visually distinguish it from the JSON created by the regular error rule. So let's go back to the transaction list. Here, refresh it. Now watch it carefully. This is the request rule. It is marked in red because it resulted in an error. And you can see that control went here, then here, then the default fault injection point. And after that, this yellow shading shows that there happened an error over here and future processing actions are skipped. Now see that once this happened, control went into a call. It shows what? Type me call. So it is calling something, okay? What it is calling? It's calling onError action. And you can see that this onError action, whatever rule was specified in the onError action, it started executing and it generated the response that you see on the Postman screen. Okay, fine. So what is the big deal here? No big deal here. All I wanted to show you here is that we were able to override the default behavior of the DataPower, wherein if an error happens in the request rule or response rule, the control transfers to the error rule. In our case, the control did not transfer to the error rule. We managed to transfer it to the onError action, which executed a separate error rule. Fine. Now here, as a side note, I also want to tell you that in this case, error mode was cancel. The cancel means that as soon as the error happened here, the control will go to onError action. OnError action will invoke this processing rule, and whatever this rule returns will be returned back to the caller. All future actions will be cancelled. Future actions on the request rule will be cancelled. You want to override this behavior? Yes, it is possible. If I select continue and click on done button, what will happen is that as soon as an error is thrown from fault injection point, the control will come back here on error rule. The error rule specified in onError action will get executed. The result will be returned back to the pipeline, but then a strange thing happens. DataPower will continue executing the future processing actions, which mean this, and this. This is the behavior when you select continue over here. Want to see that? Let's go ahead. Click on send button. And now you see a different output over here. But this will not become clear unless you see what's happening in the probe. So click on the probe and now you see that the request rule, let me make it bigger. This is the request rule. And request rule executed. After that, a call happened, right? Call to what? OnError action, right? This is the rule which is part of OnError action. And then you got, here it is. Look at this. So here, fault injection point. After that error happened, the control went back to the OnError action. Good. After that, DataPower allowed future steps to continue, which were part of this rule. And this employee info JSON-X got chance for execution. And this employee info JSON-X, it generates the JSON-X, which has employee data. And all future steps are basically converting it to JSON to JSON, JSON-X to JSON, and returning it back to the caller. And that's why you see a different response over here. So this demo shows you that this on-error action has a special capability wherein it can allow future processing actions to execute, which are part of the rule, after error handling has taken place. Of course, it may fit some of the use cases. Now that you have understood this, let us go back and try to understand what will happen if I drag and drop this after the fault injection point. So this is the fault injection point, and I am dropping it after this. So here is the behavior. This on-error action always tracks what are the processing actions after it, not before it. What does that mean? That means if at all an error happens here, 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 or here, the control will go to the on-error action. But if an error happens here, 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 or here, the control will not go to the on-error action. So in our case, the fault injection point is before it. So what should be the behavior? The behavior should be that request will come in, the fault injection point will throw an error, and this error, because there is no on-error action before it, this error will result into calling an error rule. And that we should be able to see on the probe. It will not result into calling the on-error action. Okay, so let's click on the apply policy. Let's run a test and confirm this. See, I'm getting an error, and you can see that there is no prefix over here. But it's okay. Let's go back and check the probe. Things will become more clear. Here, you see. Now you can see that there is no call over here. Request rule, and this is an error rule. You can see the name of the error rule as well, which got invoked. So here is the request rule. After fault injection point, there is an error. Okay. And this error resulted into calling this error rule, which returned the response that you see on the postman. Okay. So what then? Well, you can have more than one processing. So I can have more than one on-error action over here. So you can see that I can, if I require, where is on-error? In case an error happens here, here, or here, control will go here. But then there is another on-error action. So, which means that an error happens here, here, and here, the control will come here. So you have an opportunity where you can have many on-error actions. All these on-error actions can point to specific error rules which can deal with a specific type of errors. And you still have an ability where after the error has been handled, you can come back to the main processing rule and you can continue. This is how the on-error processing action works. And this is the beautiful thing behind the on-error processing actions. Now, we have discussed in detail about on-error processing action. And in the beginning, I told you that I'm going to talk about a little bit about the XSLT, which is typically part of your processing rule. For example, I have an error rule over here, and this XSLT, custom error handler, is part of this rule. So what type of XSLT it is, and what things it specifies. Let me open it. This is the custom XSLT I have here. And you can see that it is very simple XSLT where I'm creating a JSON object. Now you may ask me a question that where are you grabbing the error that is thrown by the request rule? I am not, and I cannot. By default, in DataPower, there is no way that you can catch those errors. Had you been dealing with Java or Node.js, you would have a complete error handling framework with you, which has error hierarchy, and there you find stack traces and all those things. Such things do not exist with XSLT programming in DataPower. To some amount, if you are dealing with errors in say gateway scripting, you can deal with them in a little bit better way. Like you have availability of some of the predefined variables like error codes or error strings, etc. But if you are writing an XSLT program, your options are limited. What error is thrown in the request rule, I cannot see it in the error handling XSLT. To mitigate this issue, what programmers do is, in the request rule, they keep on saving data in the context variables. Those context variables have a lifetime of a transaction. So in error rule, your XSLT can go back and refer to those context variables and possibly get some idea behind what error has happened or what was the state of the transaction when the error has happened, and can return the response accordingly. This is the most or widely used way in which the errors are handled in the DataPower, especially in the error handling rule. Why? Because we do not have availability of such a stack traces as it is available in programming languages like Java or C++. So having an appliance has its own advantage and disadvantage. Here, I'm not showing you that way. Why? Because that is not very much specific to the error handling. It is a technique of writing your transaction state on the context variables, and if at all some error happens, in the error rule, you can have XSLT read them, identify at what stage the error has happened, possibly the error as well, and can return the required response back to the caller. So this is the way you're going to deal with that. If you are dealing in gateway scripting, perhaps you have some more liberty wherein you have some stack traces available, but I think the way gateway scripting has evolved over a period of time, such stack traces used to be available in older firmware version of DataPower, but with the newer firmware version, such stack traces are also diminishing. So use them with caution. That's all about the error handling in the DataPower. Thanks for watching.